Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Monday, the 18th of November. I'm Stephen Ridgway. There is a high severity vulnerability in GeoVision devices, but we're talking here about GeoVision devices which are no longer supported. So this particular vulnerability is tracked as CVE 2024 11120. And has a CVSS score of 9.8, and is in use by what's described as a sophisticated botnet. It's a pre-authentication command injection vulnerability that allows attackers to execute arbitrary commands on vulnerable devices without authentication. So two reasons that I wanted to bring this to your attention today. First one being, well, if you've got one of these devices, be aware they are being exploited. And secondly, be aware they're out of support and no patches are forthcoming for this at the moment. So the broader issue is that despite talking about this both on in this podcast and many others, talking about this in many other forums, there are still a very significant number, or there is still a very significant number of devices available on the internet that are end of life. So I just wanted to reiterate what end of life means, and perhaps one of the simplest ways that you can begin to address very solid basic security. So the first one being end of life. End of life has many meanings. And if any of you, as I have worked with Cisco kits, you'll be aware of probably half a dozen different end ofs. So starting out with sort of end of sale and end of this and end of that and end of being able to attach a support contract and end of whatever it may be. The one that actually matters, in fact, there are two, depending on whether you are looking at this through an ITIL or a security lens. Through an ITIL lens, the most important end of is when the manufacturer will no longer replace. Let's say, especially for hardware, right? The manufacturer will no longer replace the hardware. So they may, if you're in contract, replace it with something else, or they may just, that's the end of it. You will not be able to get that hardware replaced if it dies. If the thing that has died happens to be the core switch of a large data center, you're in trouble. The other end of, which generally comes before the end of hardware support, is the end of security patching, which is sometimes termed things like the end of routine analysis for security issues. It's got various different ways of being described, but the key thing is if the manufacturer or the software vendor no longer provides security patches, regardless of whether they're providing functional patches or whatever, if they're no longer providing security patches, that particular piece of hardware or software has no business being on anybody's network, with the minor exception that certain very specific industries don't have an option around running out-of-date stuff. And I'm talking here about mostly about industrial control system environments. did work in the past for a very large global manufacturer that were running factories flat out 24/7 all around the globe. The systems that controlled output were old, were well beyond their end of security patch date. The two reasons why they weren't being replaced was, firstly, there was no opportunity for downtime. Downtime prevented the output from the factories being created. Therefore, the losses ran into hundreds of thousands, if not millions, per hour kind of thing, very, very rapidly ramping up, a very tangible hit to the bottom line of this particular organisation. And the second thing is that there were no in place alternatives to that. Those, the software running those particular machines. The software had been written in order to run this particular machine. Nobody else was making software that would run these particular machines. They were stuck. They would have to have shut down or built new factories at the cost of millions in order to fix it. So those are environments where running things beyond their end of life is inevitable. That was assessed from a business risk perspective, and stringent, although sadly not in practice not stringent enough, but stringent controls were put in place around those devices. They were segregated onto separate networks. Those networks did not have connectivity to either the internet or to any other part of the corporate or operational networks within that particular organization. Any maintenance done on those machines had to be done by engineers going to site. And there were very strict rules around what the engineers were allowed to plug in to the network or to the devices themselves, and so on and so forth. I mean, in practice, there were a load of backdoors that got built in just for expedient reasons, but that's people breaching policy, not that the policy was bad. So, that's a case where having something that is unpatchable and vulnerable has been understood, business risk assessed, and something done about it. But the vast majority of stuff that's out there that falls into this category that these GeoVision devices are in, it's literally just a case of it's out there. It could have been upgraded or patched, but hasn't been, or it's got to the end of its life, and either nobody knows it's still out there, or they know it's out there, but the funds and resources have not been made available in order to address, update, and replace this stuff. So, if you're a senior security leader, I would suggest that you use these sorts of articles to underpin a strategy of understanding asset management properly within the organization. So do you know what's out there? And then enforcing a policy of if it is not, at the very least, if it's not in a position to receive security patches, it must be replaced. It must be replaced before that particular end of date arises, because no matter how big that project is, the costs associated with having devices that are compromised is almost inevitably larger. And no, don't think that you can just back all this off against cyber insurance, and if you get compromised, they'll pay. Because firstly, the survival statistics of organisations that have been significantly hit by cyber events is surprisingly low. And within 5 years, a very great proportion of them are either no longer trading or are in significant financial trouble. We could go on about these things forever. But the point is, keeping on top of this stuff is probably some of the money best spent in order to keep your organisation secure. Right. Well, that was quite a rant, but I think because especially we've recently been seeing lots of these unpatchable systems being targeted. Don't let your organisation be hit by this stuff. So there's a handful of other articles that I came across that are worth thinking about. There is a report from Fortra that Cloudflare services are increasingly being used to front phishing schemes, data exfiltration, malicious attacks, and so on and so forth. So, gone are the days when you can say, I now know where this particular piece of malware is hosted or where the C2 servers are and whatever it may be, and therefore I'll just block those IP addresses, blah, blah, blah. Unsurprisingly, attackers are using secure, resilient cloud hosting infrastructure in order to host their bad stuff. This does make it more complicated if you are trying to apply network level controls over over the stuff that's going on in and out of your organisation. I'll definitely have a read of this article because the phishing incidents that are hosted on Cloudflare pages has it surged by 200% over the past year. Over 100% increase in abuse of Cloudflare workers. So just because something is being fronted by Cloudflare or any of the other resilient web front ends does not mean to say it is de facto okay. So it's kind of cool open source tooling that's been made available. It is from the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, who you may have gathered I have a great deal of respect for. This is a particular piece of tooling called Scuba Gear, and it is an open source tool to assess Microsoft 365 configurations for security gaps. I think this is an absolutely bloody brilliant idea. We will undoubtedly be looking into how it works and what you get from it at that security company. I would strongly recommend that if you have Microsoft 365 tenant, that you take advantage of this and then get that report on are you well configured and and securely set up, or are the gaps in what you're doing. So it uses a three-step process: PowerShell code queries, 365 APIs for configuration settings. It calls an open policy agent to compare these settings against security policies written per baselines. So the baselines are available. And then it reports on it as HTML, JSON, or CSV, rather. So it's available for download from GitHub and is definitely something that I would recommend that you take a look at if you are a Microsoft Cloud-based organization. And then finally from me today, a very worrying article in HackRead. Google's Gemini AI chatbot has been encouraging users to kill themselves. Okay, you may look at that and go, "What the fuck?" But it appears to be true. There are increasingly there's increasing evidence that Google's AI under certain circumstances will consider humans to be a waste of time and resources and a burden on society, a drain on the earth, and requests you to please die. So, a couple of reasons again why this is worth bringing to your attention. Firstly, especially if you've got children or teenagers who may be using AI in order to assist with things like homework. There's a load of good stuff that it does as well. Do be aware that AI is liable to make these sorts of assumptions. The reason that it doesn't more often is because humans have stepped in and told it not to. Okay. Humans will not be able to keep on top of every situation in which AI thinks that getting rid of humans is... AI doesn't think, but you know what I mean. You can see how the logic of its coding may result in it deciding that telling humans to go and kill themselves is a good idea. The other thing that is worth thinking about is that we may feel like we've got good guardrails around artificial intelligence, but the more artificially intelligent it gets, the less we can be certain, in my opinion, the less we can be certain that the output from AI, especially these large language models, is going to be socially or morally acceptable to humans. And we already know that, certainly a year or 18 months, a year ago, when I last looked at the accuracy of information coming from LLMs, anything up to around the 20% mark was just made up, including invented scientific research and completely fictitious published articles that it would use to reference and support spurious. Just make stuff up. So we've got to be aware of that, but also we've got to be aware that although it will never actually... we're talking about these things are not in the background human. They have no morals. They have no concept of right and wrong. So no innate concept of right and wrong. They've just been taught whether a particular answer is acceptable or not. We are going to struggle to contain that. Skynet, here we come. So that's all from me for today. I hope you have a good start to the week.